Guys, Chinese Kung Fu is real. Take a look at this. Okay, this guy is using his throat, the weakest part of the body, to bend the metal rebar. Oh, this guy's even crazier. He's bending the rebar as if it's rubber. But wait a minute. Is it actually rubber though? Let's take a look at this. You see these giant, thick, supposedly metal rebars burning on fire, and they just turn into ashes. So yes, these rebars are not made of metal, they're made of rubber. And they're not prop for magic tricks, they're used in actual construction in Communist China. Why? I grew up in Communist China, so maybe I could explain. So rebars are short for reinforcing bar. It's supposed to be the skeleton of a building, but in China, these bars that's found on construction sites can be bent easily. Look at this woman. I wonder if there's any metal inside these rebars. And the words on screen says, these are the fake rebars found inside concrete. This guy just picked up these used rebar from this building and he can bend it very easily. I wonder how real the concrete is. And some other ones are not so bendable, but they break easily. The construction worker was very shocked. And even with rebars at this quality, people are using the minimum amount they can in the building, like this. Can you guess what happens when you walk on the floor like this? In China, these kind of poorly constructed buildings are called 豆腐渣工程, which means tofu dreg projects, basically referring to how easily they break and crumble. A lot of buildings in China are made like this. Look at the exterior of this building. It's not only dangerous for the people that's living inside the building, but it can just hit any passerbys easily and kill them on site. So why do people do this? Money, of course. But there's a difference between private companies who are contracted to do these constructions and try to save pennies here and there versus government-related buildings such as schools. It's very common for private companies to cut corners and save money on construction materials, violate building codes, and a lot of times don't pay the construction workers their labor. When these things are exposed, these companies will take the consequences and the people in charge will be put behind bars. On the other hand, it's worse with the government-related buildings because the people in charge and the people who's responsible can usually get away with it. China practiced something called the compulsory education. It's a 9-year mandatory educational system. They rolled this out in 1982. It was officially added onto the Chinese constitution. It sounds like a good thing on the surface. Everyone's getting free education, which is actually not free. But on the surface, a lot of people, a lot of kids are entitled to education. Sounds great, right? Not so much. Because the Chinese Communist Party, they don't care about education, but they care about image. They want the world to know, oh, China is advancing and it's allowing the poor population to get education. In order to show that, they have to force the local provisional government, the villages and the towns to really meet the requirement. What happened is the central government, especially before 2000, they're not giving out grants. And even if they do, it's not enough. It's way below what's needed. And with the limited grant that they're giving to the local people, each level of the way, from the central government to the provisional government to the city to the village to the town, every time the grant passes through a layer, it gets less and less. By the time the grant reaches the local people, there's either none or pathetic amount of money to make schools happen. On top of that, there's usually a strict deadline on when and how many of these schools have to be built to meet the requirement. So the local people have no choice but to use whatever means they could manage to do and find to make it happen, to meet the quota. And a lot of times they have to do it in a rush. And that's why so many tragedies happen in communist China with these tofu dreg schools. For example, several months ago in July, the roof of a school gymnasium in the city of Qiqihar in China completely collapsed while a middle school girls volleyball team was practicing inside, and 11 of these girls were killed and 4 were injured. When it happened, local government was trying to cover it up and also finding excuses, blaming it on the construction workers. But the root of the problem is the tofu dreg building. And the worst and the most infamous tragedy these tofu dreg buildings has caused is back in 2008 when the Wenchuan earthquake happened. According to CCP's official report, over 7,000 schoolhouses collapsed, killing 5,335 students and left another 546 students disabled. And this was only the number that the state-run Xinhua news agency published a year after the event happened. But right after the earthquake, the executive vice governor of Sichuan actually said the student death toll is 19,065. And he even said the toll was incomplete at that time because the local officials were still tallying the final number. As with all tragedies that happen in communist China, the government is always trying to cover it up and the death tolls are always reduced and reduced and reduced. There's no way for us to find out how many children actually died in the earthquake. But one thing's for sure, that these schools, these buildings are definitely not built to last. After the earthquake, some whistleblower, some local school teacher, and of course, the victims' parents were all trying to investigate the problem, trying to find out what exactly is wrong with these school buildings, and all of them were silenced. The leaders were detained and sentenced to 1 to 5 years of labor camp, and the children's parents were monitored by policemen to make sure they cannot be interviewed, and also to prevent them from going to Beijing to petition for themselves. So the victims themselves are being punished again by the government. But you may wonder what happened to the corrupted officials that actually took the money that caused the buildings to be so poorly constructed. Absolutely nothing. Because the government refused to admit that these school buildings were poorly constructed, so no one in charge was at fault. And therefore, no one need to take responsibility for this horrendous tragedy, and all the children that died as a result died in vain. This is how the society under the communist regime works. Even a huge tragedy like this can be covered up, and no one needs to take any responsibility. I can only imagine things getting worse and worse. And to me, it's really not the earthquake that killed all these children. I see it as a result of the greed of all of these corrupt officials combined, and of course the system itself. And it's not just the officials, everyone who's involved in trying to silence the whistleblower, trying to silence the victim's family, they all took part in the tragedy of the death of more than 5,000 children, and potentially more because how they covered up this huge tragedy. The corrupted officials might not believe in the afterlife, but sooner or later, they will get punished and pay for what they have done. And there's no escape from it, I'm sure of it, because this is the law of the universe. What do you think? Thank you for watching. I'm Ali, and I'll see you next time.